Hi there, how's it going? My name is Laura and I work in application security at Canva. Today I'm going to be talking about permaculture, which you might have heard about in the context of gardening. I'm going to go through what permaculture is, how it is applied to my own garden, and how its principles have shown up in my work as a security engineer. Now, while this talk may be an excuse to share my gardening photos with a captive audience, my real hope is that you come away from it with a new thought sparked, maybe a different lens or thinking tool to apply to a problem, project, or opportunity that you're working on, be it in security or in the garden. So let's get into it. It all started 2 years ago. My partner Jamal and I were living in regional New South Wales and were looking to buy our first home. We knew we wanted a big garden, and so I borrowed and read a lot of library books on gardening, sustainability, and related topics. The word permaculture kept popping up, and I got curious about it. But before I keep throwing this word around, let's unpack what it actually means. Permaculture is based on the words permanent, as in sustainable, and culture, including agriculture. At its core, permaculture is a design framework, a toolbox of patterns and principles for building systems that meet people's needs while being cohesive, easy to maintain, and sustainable. It's grounded in observing natural systems and also draws deeply from Indigenous knowledges around the world. Permaculture was developed in the 1970s in Tasmania by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, and while it's often linked to organic gardens or sustainable homes, like this one here, it can actually apply to any system that involves people. And as we know, people are such an intrinsic part of security. Security exists to protect people's data, their creativity, and the systems they build and rely on every day. And of course, people keep things interesting by clicking links, reusing passwords, and finding wonderfully inventive ways to break our best-laid controls. Without people, we may as well toss this whole security thing in the compost bin. As I learned more about permaculture, I developed a much clearer picture of what I wanted from a home, and I began to see these principles showing up in my everyday life, including to my work in AppSec. Last year, Jamal and I finally bought our first home. Oh, thanks. It's on just under an acre in a rural area, surrounded by farms, but still close-ish to town, and we're absolutely loving it. Since then, we've slowly been taking on bigger garden projects, using permaculture design to make them more manageable and better suited to how we live. We've also attended a few free local permaculture workshops, which helped us apply the concepts practically. So let's get into a bit of what I learned. As a foundation, permaculture is based on 3 core ethics that inform and underpin every design decision. These are earth care. This one's fairly self-explanatory, looking after the planet that supports us. People care, which is about doing the least harm possible to others. I see this one really resonate in security as our goal is ultimately to reduce harm. And fair share, which is all about passing on surplus and sharing skills and knowledge to allow more folks in more communities to thrive. It's also about deciding what enough is, since no system has infinite resources. For me, I see fair share tying in strongly with the way we communicate. A lot of what regular people hear about security, especially in the media, is confusing, scary, or just plain wrong. And we have the opportunity to instead make it accessible, useful, and even empowering. Building on these ethics, David Holmgren developed 12 design principles, which act as thinking tools to offer different lenses for solving problems. You don't need to use all 12 principles at once, but rather they serve as a guide, with some applying more than others, depending on your particular situation. And yes, 12 does seem like a lot. So for this talk, I'm just going to be focusing on 3. These are observe and interact, integrate rather than segregate, and use small and slow solutions. And I think the best way to explore these is with an example. So let's start with one from my garden, and then we'll tie it back to security. Earlier this year, we got some day-old chicks, which I was very excited about as I'd been wanting chickens for ages. The only problem was we didn't actually have a coop yet. So this was our project. Chicks need somewhere warm and cozy to live for about 8 weeks, so we had roughly until then to figure it out. The first principle we applied was observe and interact. This principle is about using all of our senses and powers of observation to assess things before taking action. By taking the time to properly observe the system, its patterns, flows, and dynamics before trying to make changes, we can hopefully design something that's better overall. I also like to think of this one as the scientific method in action. If you have a great understanding of the system and then you add or change something, you can observe whether it had the effect that you desired and adjust accordingly. In the case of our chicken coop, it meant doing absolutely nothing. For 9 painstaking months, we just lived on the property, making no major changes. We did observe a lot though. We walked the garden daily, tracked which areas of the yard received sunlight, and noted where the rain pooled and drained away. As someone who is not naturally patient, this was a real test, but as a result, we were able to find a good location down the bottom of our yard to put our chicken coop. It's out of the way of future projects, gets a bit of shade, and is far enough from the house that we don't hear our rooster, Colonel, crowing at 4 in the morning. It also shares a boundary fence with our neighbours, who love chickens and toss scraps over the fence for them. Overall, the simple time spent observing before jumping into this project gave us a setup that fits our landscape and works really well for us. The next principle we used is integrate rather than segregate. This one's about the relationships between elements in a system. By putting the right things in the right place, elements can support each other to create something stronger and more self-sustaining than if they were apart. It's that classic saying, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. For our chicken coop, this came to life when we realised just how much our neighbours loved chickens. They mentioned they were thinking of building their own coop, and since ours is against the shared fence between our properties, and we had plenty of space, we instead offered to pop a gate in and share our coop. Now, instead of 2 separate coops in adjacent properties, we have just one that uses fewer resources and saves us both time and money. The final principle I want to touch on is use small and slow solutions. This principle promotes the idea that small and slow solutions are easier to maintain and less resource intensive to set up, which is often far more sustainable in the long run. To me, I see this tying in with the idea of building a minimum viable product before making something bigger, and also that it's quite an art to solve a complex problem with an elegantly simple solution. For our chicken coop, this meant choosing a super simple feeding system. It's literally just a bucket with a hole drilled in the bottom and a wooden toggle. The chickens peck the toggle, a few grains of food fall out, and they eat it. It cost under $10, took less than an hour to build, it holds a month worth of food, and helps keep rodents away. With so many high-tech or expensive feeders on the market, this was a huge win for us. So, we've talked about 3 permaculture principles that I applied when designing our chicken coop, and hopefully you've got a feel for what each one is about. So let's jump into how these same ideas have shown up in my work in security. Canva has a website's document type that it lets you design and publish websites from the Canva editor. Earlier this year, I jumped on board to help our websites team with designing and implementing single sign-on for Canva websites. The idea being that you could make and publish a website and set it up with your preferred identity provider. Then, when a user navigates to the website, they are redirected to your single sign-on page to authenticate before being granted access. And yes, that meant SAML, because nothing says fun more than crying over auth specifications. But how did permaculture fit into all of this? Let's start with observe and interact. When we started the SSO project, the team already had an architecture in mind and some early feedback from other folks in security. In the same vein as observing my garden before choosing a location for the coop, I started by properly understanding the current state and context of the project. How did they plan for it to work? What trade-offs had they made? And what constraints were they dealing with? This gave me a clearer foundation to start from and also a much better working relationship with the engineers. When we did start to talk about security concerns, I could properly explain the risks in the context of their goals, as well as propose mitigations that worked within their constraints. I also see this play out in other security processes, especially design reviews and threat modeling, where you want a good understanding of the lay of the land before diving into concerns or things you think the team should change. And I do want to call out here that there are, of course, times in security when you probably don't want to sit back and take it all in before taking action. But I do still think this applies, albeit with a much shorter feedback loop, even in situations where things might be on fire. Next up is integrate rather than segregate. This was a complex design with a decent amount of security risk. So I had buy-in from my team to partner closely with the engineers through the whole design process, rather than just coming in for a point-of-time review. In the broader world of application security, I think this principle speaks strongly to the concept of security partnerships, where security engineers embed within or work closely with specific teams to help shape and guide design implementation, rather than working from the sidelines. For this feature, it meant coming in early during the design phase, architecting a more favourable solution with the team, co-authoring the design document, and consulting throughout the implementation phase, as well as wrapping it up with a code review and penetration test of what had been built. While this is definitely not feasible for all projects, this level of collaboration built shared understanding, trust, and ultimately a better and more secure outcome. And finally, I tried to hold true to the principle of using small and slow solutions. Early on in this project, I observed some unmitigated security issues in the original design and flagged these risks and impacts with the team. They were absolutely amazing to work with and really keen to prioritize security, so they went away and reworked their design to mitigate these. This new version did somewhat mitigate the risks, but it was super complicated and honestly didn't yield massive security gains for all the effort and complexity. While they could have gone ahead with this, we did some research, thinking, and I chatted with the team about some simpler options that gave more tangible security benefits. Similarly to the chicken's bucket feeder, the final design ended up being cleaner, simpler for the team to implement, and much easier to test and review from a security perspective as well. So there you have it. Just like when building a chicken coop, permaculture principles also apply to our work in security. By observing, integrating closely with the team, and choosing simple, sustainable solutions, we built not just a stronger design, but a stronger working relationship too. I hope that some of these examples and principles today might have sparked a little thought or idea for you, or may serve as a thinking tool in the future. I find for me, permaculture is a nice, intuitive way to apply systems thinking, and maybe it makes sense to your brain too. Now, I did say this talk was partially an excuse to share gardening photos, so if that's why you're here, then here you go, this is for you. And I do have one final ask for all of you before I wrap up. It's to help settle an ongoing debate between my partner and I and make a personal dream of mine come true. If, while you're wandering around the con today, you happen to see this person, my partner Jamal, can you please go up to them and say, "Hi, I think you should get goats." Thank you.